Okay, welcome back to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today we're going to have a conversation about parenting in the world in which we live. I'm joined by Trace, Tom, and Jeremy, and our audience knows Trace and myself, but I'm going to let Tom and Jeremy start by introducing themselves a bit, and then we'll just jump right into the conversation about parenting. And let's start with Tom.
Thank you, Ashley. Tom Ruby. Let's see. I was born a peasant in Serbia, and my mother escaped from the country with me. Ended up living in the city in Los Angeles, growing up there, and then spent 30 years in the Air Force. Retired to 15 and a half acres in the hill country of Kentucky in the Knobs. We've got a 15 and a half acre farm. And when people say, what do you farm? Trees in our garden. And we're turning 6 acres that used to be pasture into a forest. We work pretty actively with our horticultural extension agents and the state foresters to do that, to keep the creeks flowing, and habitat. We've got a pretty nice orchard. And what's relevant to this discussion is that all 4 of our kids and their families love coming back here. They really, really love coming back here. So our son wants to raise his family on this place.
We're going to have to pick your brain on that, because I feel like part of I think a lot of us are probably in the thick of the parenting of children stage, and a lot of us, for us, that's the goal. So we can kind of get into the idea of the what has worked and getting you to that place. So all right, Jeremy, let you introduce yourself now.
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks you guys. Appreciate you including me in this. And we live in the Denver area. And we have 3 kiddos. We homeschool. I'm a web designer, and a lot of what I'm looking to explore is how to, not only raise kids well, but also kind of thinking more long-term, kind of, Tom, kind of what you were talking about as far as like how do you build something that's beautiful and lasting and that is just built well, not even just talking about a physical building, but like building a family, right? Like it is something that you are building, it's not just happenstance. So yeah.
Wonderful. I think what I'll start with is this question that often comes up with people who I guess we will call doomer aware people, who just like are just, I guess overwhelmed by the state of the world. And the response to this from some is don't have children at all. Like, how can one bring children into this world? This is typically called the anti-natalist position. I don't think it's like so strong as anti or pro-natalist, or it has to be those extremes, but I think wrestling with that is probably central to our discussion here. So I just want to start with that. I want to do a little hat tip to Jeff, the doomsday parent, who couldn't make it because he has some childcare responsibilities. But he sent on some notes that he's been working on with regard to this question. And obviously this is something he thinks a lot about. And he has this quote from Jordan Hall, who's, I think, I don't know much about Jordan, but I know that he's like adjacent to this sense-making community. And I just want to read this quote to start and get your guys' responses. So Jordan says, just inheriting children that we had in a place where maybe there's a little bit more inertia, a little bit less consciousness about the magnitude of the challenges we face as a human family. But literally, as part of our commitment, our journey into how we do this, to use parenting as our crucible and our binding to the mast. As far as I'm concerned, this is not just a little bit important. It may in fact be the central line, the axis mundi, around which any plausible future for humanity can be found. So he's making the argument here, like basically having children forces you to like engage with the, you know, the problems of the world in like a much more visceral way. I found this to be true, and I'm wondering if anyone else has you know, thoughts on this topic.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, for sure. I think I mean, I remember my kids are 12, 9, and we have a 1-year-old as well. And you know, I remember 12 years ago holding my kid for the first time. It's like, man, the world is completely different now, you know. And so as you grow as being a parent, from what I found is that, yeah, you are a lot more engaged. You're a lot more, you start thinking a lot farther down the road. You start thinking a lot more about like, what are we leaving behind? You know, you end up, for myself at least, I ended up caring a lot more about the problems that are going on, you know, and not in a fearful way, but just in a way of like, okay, like, what are we doing about this? And how can I, as a parent of this person, you know, of these people, you know, respond in such a way? What are we going to, you know, a big thing is like, as the world gets a little bit crazier, it feels like it's getting a lot more global, right? Like, it's just like, I mean, even just the news, right? You can read news from anywhere, and you're knowing what's going on anywhere, which is just a ridiculous idea from history, right? Like, at no point in history could we be that connected and that quick, right? And so it's like, okay, well, how do we respond to that as parents? And so it forces me to think about that, you know, where it's like, if I didn't have kids, it's just like, well, it's just kind of myself or my wife and I or whatever, you know. It's a lot easier just to not care as much. But, you know, you have these kids who like have no say in a lot of things. And you're like, all right, well, I'm speaking up for them, you know. Their future depends on it to a certain degree, you know. So
Yeah, totally. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just going to piggyback on that and say that I think that raising kids forces you to move from the abstract to the practical. Okay. So these no kids people that are out there today. So I'm saying this without judging them, but I'm not making a judgment about whether they ought to be doing what they're doing, but I'm going to say what I think is the natural consequence of that. Okay. You can say whatever you want about saving the world, and you can say whatever you want about, you know, how you think humanity ought to be. But if you're, you know, if you're not having kids, you can buy your $6 cup of coffee in your disposable, you know, cup and stand in line. You know, there's a Starbucks here in our small town on the bypass, and it's stunning to me at 3:30 in the afternoon that there's 16 cars standing in line or waiting in line, idling. And some of these people are idling their cars, waiting in line for their $6 cup of coffee and thinking to themselves, I'm never having kids. Okay. Having kids forces you from the abstract into the practical of, what am I going to do for these people that need my help, that need our guidance, that can't live without us. Okay. They can't forage on their own. They can't create their own heat for themselves in their own bodies. Okay. So they need us. What are we going to do for them? And what are we going to leave for them? And how are we going to prepare them to be out on their own? those are practical questions, not abstract questions, okay, that we have to do. And the idea that things are worse today than they ever have been, so we better not, have kids. We because things are worse today than they ever have been, we're going to make it better by just not having kids, is just completely out of sorts with the empirical evidence of history. Okay.
Do you want to say, do you want to say more on that point?
Yeah, sure. If the way that we've progressed, like, just listen, go to humanprogress.org. If you're ever feeling, down about where we are with humanity, just go to humanprogress.org and look up where we are. We need more kids to make things, to have the ideas to get us out of the issues that we're in today. Okay, where we at? Because our predecessors and our forefathers had kids and figured things out practically. Okay, tomorrow, the people that got us to where we're at today, they're dead. They can't figure out tomorrow's problems. Okay, tomorrow's problems have to be figured out by people, and we need people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Trace, did you want to jump in there? Oh, I'm sorry, Tom.
Go ahead. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you gave us a lot to chew on there. I think that I'll say that this is probably an unfair debate, because I think all of us have kids. Like, we're all clearly pro-natalist, right? So if there's a divide, we don't really have anyone speaking from the other side. I will say that, like, for me, having my first child was the most profound spiritual experience of my life. Like, it was Pandora's box. Like, literally, it was like I was one person, and then a second later I was another person, and I understood things. Like, my soul was just cracked open, and with that came a tremendous amount of, like, horror, right? Like, oh my gosh, I am immensely unprepared for the level of responsibility I have just taken on, right? But I don't blame people in any way, shape, or form. Kind of piggybacking on what you're saying, Tom, is I don't blame people who have not had that transformational experience for not understanding the depth of that transformation, right? I'm not a particularly religious person. And I wasn't raised in the church or anything. So for me, I understood religious conversion, religious transformation at that point. Like, I understood, well, people say, like, well, you'll just know. Like, when you've accepted Christ in your life, you'll just know. And it's just like, okay, well, that's BS. That's a lie. Like, you're telling me a story. And then having my children, I'm like, oh, I get it now. I get how you can be like one person one moment and completely different the next. And it's impossible to translate that, to articulate that to someone who has not had that conversion, right? And so I get it. I feel like it's the most logical, short-sighted, simple answer to the complex suite of problems we're facing. Okay, overpopulation is a problem. We'll just stop having kids. It's like, well, no, because, like, eventually, like, even if let's say literally 6 billion, 3 billion, whatever number it is the actual carrying capacity of the earth. We're living in a regenerative, like, stasis, right? Okay, well, I think we can all agree we don't want to just, like, murder 5 billion people, right? Like, so yes, phasing them out over time is probably the best way to do this. But at some point, we need more people. Like, and we can't just, like, have, like, this gap all of a sudden where, like, there's no 40-year-olds on the planet, Like, we're going to have to, like, we have to keep going, just in a practical sense. And I also think there's an art to parenting. It's a culture, right, that has to be passed down. And we've seen it with agriculture, right? In one generation, we snuffed out like almost all of human history as far as agricultural knowledge. The boomers left the land, raised city kids, and now no one knows how to do this stuff. And even the farmers are just industries, right? They know how to run a factory. They don't actually know how to steward the land. And so I think it's like, it's, you know, I wonder like if we could get to this place where like we're in Children of Men, but it's like self-inflicted, where we like literally like no one knows how to be a parent anymore. Like we have to like relearn how to be parents. And so it's just better to kind of like keep that culture going, even if it's, you know, a minority. And I mean, the funny thing is that like when I was 27, like when we had our first child, I was 28. First one, not a single person had a kid around us, and half of them were like, nope, never having kids. Right?
Yeah.
Only one couple, one has stuck to their guns. Only one. And it makes sense for them. They didn't want kids. They've got a million animals. They're very happy with their life. They've got a very profound friend life, right? I think that, you know, I think a little bit is short-sighted. Like, you know, let's talk when you're 65, right? Like, let's talk when you don't have anyone supporting you at that age. But, you know, and I think that's the thing, is people in their 20s are not thinking about what it will be
when they're in their 60s.
65 in a degraded, you know, apocalyptic United States with no family, no support. Everyone they know is either surrounded by their family or dead, right? And so it's like, you know, I don't know. I mean, I feel sorry for them in a way. Like, you know, it's more of just like, wow, you know, you're like really missing out. And I feel bad for you that you're missing out. But I don't blame them. I'm not even judging them. It's just, it's more of a profound sadness, you know, when you come across someone that you think is deeply misguided, or we all have probably felt it with our kids, where our kids are going to make dumb mistakes, and we're going to tell them a million times not to make those dumb mistakes, and they're still going to do it. And you almost have to have this profound sadness for them, you know, just sort of like, man, I'm really sad you have to go through this stupid thing that I went through, just because I guess you have to go through it. You're your own human being, you know, and you have to experience this loss for yourself.
Totally. So. I would just add two things. One, I think it's probably okay that this is a one-sided debate, because I think part of the doomer optimist perspective in general is to like seek the messiness despite. And so I think for us, like, I don't know, I just feel like, you know, having kids at all is like a doomer optimist project. How do you move forward towards something positive? I don't think an anti-natalist could be like a hardcore anti-natalist could be a doomer optimist, although we could get into a debate about that. But if they're just like, no, there's no hope for the future, basically, that's not really exactly what we're talking about here. We're talking about, okay, there's got to be some kind of hope. What do we do? How do we figure out what that hope is? And then the other comment is just like on like this philosophical, spiritual level, this keeps coming up in doomer optimism. Like you make this point about religion, Trace, like this, it's like death and life, creation, destruction, you know, like acknowledging death and destruction, but then, you know, creating despite. I would say that it also, there's something interesting that we've talked about quite a bit, mapping onto consumption versus production. And going back to Tom's point, I'm thinking about like these anti-natalist people, not to caricature anyone, but like, you know, the life is built around consumption. You know, you're not, for a lot of people in the US, like the majority of their thoughts and power come from like, I'm going to choose to consume this thing or this thing. And I think there is fundamentally a shift that is lined up with the creation part of this back and forth between creation and destruction. That's about production and parenting as an act of production, like an act of creation. You're producing a family, you're producing a family culture, a person, you know, a whole perspective, a set of skills, all of that. So I don't know if Jeremy or Tom, you had any follow-up comments to that?
Yeah, I think to kind of go back a little bit to what Trace and Tom were talking about, I did grow up in the church, and one of the interesting things, being a child of the 80s and 90s, that was right in kind of the wake of the Jesus movement in the 70s, and there were some really good things actually that happened in the Jesus movement. My dad's a product of it, but one of the big things was this whole end times theology, where it's like, I met people that didn't have kids, that didn't get married, because they're like, listen, it's the end times. Like, why would we do that? And this kind of anti-natalist, like, listen, we only have 10 years, whatever it is, whatever number. I mean, the funny thing is that number's been, 10, 20 years has been kicked around since I was a kid. Like, I remember them talking about it, when I was a kid, and it was like, oh, by year 2000, year 2010, it's like, so anyway, but it has that same hallmark of it's the end times. It's just a different religious perspective to a certain degree, and yeah, and so I think that moving forward, realizing that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what, like, I think there's a big, I love this push of like, hey, listen, we have lost some skills as a culture, and it's really because of technology, right? Cars and roads and jobs that we can have that allow us to not get our hands dirty, but going back to, like, as a parent thinking long term, like, is that a good thing culturally to have, and I think a lot of people are feeling it, and they just don't know what to do about it, and so being able to have these conversations, and then have some people who are a year ahead of us, 5 years ahead of us, whatever, in this kind of movement of like, how can we bring some of these skills back and learn it along with our kids, and be like, hey guys, we're on an adventure. Like, let's go on this adventure together and discover something. And I find it so funny how it's like, I think COVID really, really pushed a lot of people into this thing of like, maybe we are living in dystopia already, and there is, such benefit to just getting your hands dirty and doing something real and producing something real. And yeah, so
I do think that we're already, I mean, I wrote an article last year, maybe the year before, for my blog that says our future dystopias really are our pasts. Okay. Mm-hmm. Years ago, my mother-in-law wanted to watch the Hunger Games, and so the kids, we all got together, and my in-laws were here with the kids, and we're going to watch the Hunger Games. And my father-in-law, about 30 minutes into this, just says, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. Why can't they ever make movies about something that's real? Why do we have to watch something that's never going to ever happen? And I said, but this has happened. He goes, no, this has not happened. This is some future that's never going to exist. I said, no, this is actually just a retelling of the Roman Republic. Yeah. These are the gladiatorial games of the Roman Republic, and these are the Roman aristocracy that are all dressed up like this. And this is actually what we have empirical evidence that this is what actually it happens throughout history.
It's football. It's football, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we raise this like group of people to distort their bodies and then destroy their brains for our entertainment, right? Now, they don't kill each other on the field, although sometimes they actually do, or get, but they're naming themselves for our entertainment. Every game, some kid has a season-ending or career-ending knee injury, right? On live national television. And when we know that anyone who continues with that life will be brain damaged by the time they're 50, right? We know this. Right. And yet what is it, a $50 billion industry has grown up around raising this group of people to go kill themselves for our entertainment,
Well,
Yeah.
and the reason I'm bringing that up is that I want this, like this whole discussion is hinting around the edges of intentionality and objectives. Okay, if we're going to have kids, what is the objective of that? Okay,
Yeah.
if we're going to have a homestead, what is the objective of that? Like, why are you doing that? What's your why? Like, the people that have kids that haven't thought through their why, okay, and just have kids because that's what you just do, it's a crapshoot what you get out of that. Okay, you may get kids that get it, you may not. Okay, likely the kids are going to grow up to not have any kind of intentionality. Okay, but I didn't have my conversion like Trey's did until we had our third daughter, and I realized that for the past 12 years, I was out busting my ass to get ahead, and I was getting ahead, and I was on a fast train. I mean, I was on a really fast train, and it was when I was in a job that required me to stop and think every day. Okay, the job was it was like a think tank for the Air Force, where we were encouraged to go to the gym. We were highly encouraged. It was kind of like if you were sticking around late just to stick around late at the office, they're like, dude, you're already here. What are you trying to get more than this? Okay. And so I had some time, and I took my oldest daughter on to a dance convention in New York City. And the city was awful, but it was the time with her that I'd never had. And she was 12. And I thought, what have I missed? What the hell have I been doing? What have I missed? Okay. And what am I going to get if I stay on this fast train? That's going to be like, what am I going to get out of that? Like a bigger pension check. And what am I not going to get out of that? Any kind of relationship with my kids, and maybe with my wife either. Okay. And a friend of ours at the time, who was a therapist, said, your job is just to hold on until your kids turn 18 and try to get them prepared to go off on their own. Okay. And he says, I'm going to say something that you might not think is very like cool in the current context, but your kids are either going to be okay or they're not. Okay. And you can have some influence on that around the edges, on the margins. Okay. But you got to be deliberate in what you do. You have to really think about that. So that's what we did. We really started thinking about that. I jumped off the fast train, and everybody said, well, you can't jump off the fast train. You'll die. I mean, you're moving too fast. You'll tumble and die. And I go, no, I think I can do it. And I go, oh no, you'll never be able to do it. And I go, no, I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to try. And guess what? I made it almost as far as I would have, had I stayed on the fast train. And in return, I have a great relationship with my wife. We built something intentionally for the kids and our great grandchildren's grandchildren, like a house that's going to last, and some kind of a farm. And my own son can identify all the trees on the farm, and he's going to do that too. He says he can't wait to teach his own kids that. But it has to get back to, what's your intention? Why are you doing this? And then once you have that intention, once you have that objective, what, it literally becomes like a strategic planning thing. What are the tasks that you're going to set about to accomplish? What is it? If you want your kids to do this, if this is true, what should I expect to see? Right? If I want kids to turn out like this, then what do I need to do? Okay, got to spend time with them, got to show them that you can say abstractly, well, family is the most important thing. But if you do something different than that, okay, then they're going to actually learn that you're just lying. Okay, and that's okay to do in life. Okay,
Right.
so if you want your kids to know that, things are not really important, and you say that to them, but they see you just buying more and more quick to put around the house, okay, then they're going to say, oh, those words, okay, I hear that. For some reason, that's important to say those words. I really don't know what that reason is, but what's really important is I don't have to do it.
Yeah, values are what you do and not what you say they are.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
Totally. And I think it's also, I think it's super worth pointing out this huge disconnect between what people say and what they do. And it's not enough to just have kids or, say like family's everything or whatever. It's I think the intentionality is so key. And I think we can start getting into the details of like, what we've done, specifically, because I think part of our goal on this podcast is to talk to people about specifics, like what are actionable things that we actually do. I want to point out a narco-contrarian couldn't be here, but he's suggested part of his project is to teach your kids to love a place, teach them to be observant. I think that resonates with what you said, Tom. For Patrick and I, even before having kids, before I would get pregnant, we bought land in Uruguay. We bought the land, and then a couple months later, I was like, okay, I'm okay with getting pregnant now, because we had a goal, a place to go, a project as a family, and then early on in our relationship, we talked a lot about how can we manage our economic situation so that we can be with our children as much as possible, especially in their youngest years. So like before school age, because they're just so intense at that time, and they need you so intensely. And what if we reimagined a way to retire, or like a mini retirement during the time when your caregiving duties are the greatest? Why wait? Why be gone your child's whole life, and then you're 65 and they're adults, and that's when you take a break from work? It's like, and then you're bored. So for us, we've just lived with less. We've done something in sociology, they call it downshifting, which is like work less, but buy less and need less, but you have more free time and more relationships, and more you're rich in time, basically, and freedom. So we've done that, and it's been great. It's been so wonderful to be with our kids while they're little, to like be with first steps and first words, and to do it together. It's been such a joy for our relationships with them and with each other. Patrick, did you have something you wanted to add? No, sorry. Jeremy, I'll let you go if you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, sure. I think that we kind of did the same thing where, my wife stays home to, like I said, we homeschool. And those first 5 years, both mom and dad are important, but mom is so important during that season. I think it's clear. I mean, they've done studies on it even, right? Like those first 4 or 5 years are how kids learn how to be social, so all those little things, being social is really funny because it's 100 different little rituals that we do, right? And we don't just go up to someone and be like, give me that, and you think, oh, of course we don't do that. That's just not, no, like we actually teach that, and they pick up on that. And so it's really fun having a 1-year-old again after having a decent gap in between the kids, because you're reminded of just those little things of like, just how important that time is for them. And it provides them the safety to learn that stuff. And like, hey, I'm part of this group here. These are my people, and I've worked from home for 95% of my kids' childhood, and it's been invaluable. It's been awesome, because it's like, I don't have a commute. I don't have to, spend time just getting to where I need to go. It's like I can make breakfast for the family and be there for lunches. And it's like, how many times it's like, hey, the little boy said a word, like, come up and like, let's enjoy it together and stuff. And also, being homeschooling, I'm able to, be the principal to a certain degree, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, hey, I need your help. Like, kids need a pep talk or whatever it is. And, but what does that mean? That means we've got an 18-year-old car, and it means that we don't go on these vacations. And I do think, I've talked to a lot of people, like, I could never do that. Like we are not like A-type personality people where we're like, oh, let's have 8 kids in homeschool. It's like, we've done it despite our own kind of, we're both, my wife and I are a little bit more on the creative minded spectrum. So it's like, we're kind of scattered, both of us are, and yet we're still like doing this thing. And there's so many resources out there that can help you. And part of the reason why we are where we're at is there's a really good community around it too. And so it's like, that's such a massive piece is setting up not just your own system, but also community piece where you have other people. You have the Toms of the world, that are a little bit ahead of you and have those wise things to say that they've been through it and they've made mistakes that you can learn from, as well as younger people that you can be, a sounding board off of. And, and so I think that's been a really huge piece. But yeah, just setting yourself up, like it's such an important, Tom, I really like what you said, being intentional. It's like thinking ahead and being like, what do we want to build here? Because a family there's this kind of going back to the anti-natalist thing a little bit, but there's this mindset, and I think it's the kind of like scientific materialism type of mindset of it, why would I just, how narcissistic of me, why would I just want to make copies of myself? I've heard that, like, why do I want to have kids? I'm not, I don't need little me's running around, and maybe the world doesn't need little me's running around, but it's funny. I went through a phase early on in parenthood where it's like, everyone should be a parent. And then I went through a phase where I'm like, man, I don't think some people should be parents, but then I came back around and I was like, man, Trace, back what you said, like, it changes you. And so it's like, actually, maybe everyone should be a parent, because it does change you and it makes you think so far in advance and be like, what an interesting exercise to think, on my deathbed, who do I want around me? And what do I want to have built, and you can
work
talk
back from there.
Yeah, exactly. Work back from there for sure. And like, I've read interviews of people on their deathbed, and they never ever say, I wish I stayed on that fast train, or I wish I had more stuff, or all of that.
I wish I worked more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
Nobody's last breath is, I wish I stayed longer at the office.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Maybe one guy in the history of the world said that, and we pity him, but like, yeah. And so thinking about that and being like, I realized that actually, family's not just this, group of people that just so happens to hang out. You're building something. Your kids are going to have kids, and so the forethought is, what do you want to build? you know, and it's chaotic to a certain degree because they are their own people and they are going to make their own decisions. And some of them might just go like, I don't want to build this. I'm going to jump off and like, you know, not be part of this family. But if you're intentional enough, if you pour yourself in, if you give good boundaries, high love, high discipline, all those things, the chances of them turning out to be a net gain in society, right? It's like you have that choice when you have a kid. Like, okay, do I want them to be just consumers and be a drain on society, or do I personally want to be, as well as raise kids that are a net gain in society, that add to it, that bring creative perspective? That's a big reason why we decided to homeschool, actually, was to leave room for creativity, because it's like we need more creative thought, you know, in this world. So Tom, yeah, you want to say something?
Well, I want to say that there's people ought to be this is a normative statement I'm about to make, okay? People ought to feel free to raise their kids in a homeschool environment, in a rural environment, in a public school environment, in a private school environment. You can do all those things and still have intentionality.
For sure. For sure.
And so I see this on, yeah, this is just, it's unhealthy in social media, where you see people say, well, if you're not going to the traditional Latin mass, then you're just really not a strong Catholic. He's like, okay, come on, don't try to out church the church. Okay. You can't out church the church. Okay. And we have Einsteins that were raised in a city. Okay. And then we have engineering equivalents of Einstein that were raised on farms. Okay. And they figured out how to do things. And, you know, the Romans figured out how to make mortar that's a lot better than the concrete that we have today, without computers and without social media. But those people all came from different backgrounds. Okay. And if we're really going to make it, if the Doomer Optimism project is actually going to survive, it's not going to be narrowly segmented, and it's not going to be by making everybody a 1 or a 0, where you're either off or on. You're in this, okay, here's our hardcore lane and you can't go out of it. Okay. It has to be big enough to accept people like us that moved around and raised kids intentionally, and then built a place, as well as people that, like Ashley, that bought the place first and then raised into it. Okay. Neither one of those are better. They're both moving towards the same objective. Okay.
Yeah, I think your point is so important, because something I've talked a lot about, with just in general with Doomer Optimism, but also like big tent movements, is to not be super hardcore ideological, but instead like meet people where they're at. Everything is messy, but find an on-ramp for them. Find a way to reach them that's meaningful to them without being judgmental. So I think that's, I think that's key.
So we didn't buy things. We saved up our money and took our kids on trips. Okay. And so there were some years where I didn't even take my 30 days of leave. Okay. We would bank it for the next year and save our money, and then take our kids on a 3-week trip to the south of France and find a, we have a friend whose parents have a villa down there. Right. And then they let us live there for 3 weeks. And then we make little day trips everywhere. When the Air Force sent me to grad school, I spent, I had a summer where I didn't have any classes, where I was just writing all summer. Well, I took a month and took my 2 older daughters on a train trip through Europe. Okay. Now, I'm not saying everybody should do that, but what I'm saying is that we did those things with a very deliberate purpose. We wanted to expose them to a wider world. Now, we have family members that would say, you do realize there's bad things out there in the world. I go, yeah, I really do. Like, I'm aware that there's porn in the world. I'm not going to expose my kids to that, but I am going to explain to them that there is that in the world and that they shouldn't be doing that. And I want my kids to be ready to go to the world so they can, like, I actually had an intention for my kids to teach their kids the same kinds of things. Okay. And now what I'm not doing is saying that the people that are trying to protect their kids from the world are wrong. But what I am saying is, if you make that as your intention, then there will be necessary consequences down the road for that. Just be prepared for them. Okay. And it's all good.
I have a kind of a question. I don't know, that I think I don't even have the answer to yet, because my kids are 8 and younger. So I have a 1, a 5, and an 8-year-old. How do you navigate peers? You know what I mean? It's just like the world, we live in a place where I'm not too worried about peers. And that was intentional. You know, where our friends, their kids are all, you know, I don't know, just pure of heart. And like, there's still a culture of that, and like letting kids be kids and not being too consumeristic and this kind of thing. But I think maybe digging in more detail, like, you know, maybe with your experience, Tom, or I don't know what your guys' perspectives have been, Trace and Jeremy, with the older kids, but like, do you just, you know, tell your kids and arm them with the fact that these peers exist, and that maybe our family doesn't, you know, our family culture is opposed to certain things that those peers might introduce to them? Like, you know, how do you navigate the larger world? Because like, I think on the one hand, you want to make a robust family culture, but they also need to navigate the actual world as it is.
That's 100%.
And you need to, like, you know, so how?
Okay, so what we did is we intentionally put our kids through public school. We believed, and the evidence is borne out, and this may be just us, we're an N of 1, okay? But we believe that our family culture was strong enough to survive anything that the kids saw in school. And we knew that the kids are going to see things when they left home, okay, that they either would or wouldn't be prepared for. So we let our kids in school meet other kids, okay? And kids naturally will come home to you and say, hey, I want to play with such and such. We say, great. We figured out a methodology for letting our kids go to somebody's. We would call the parents and have a quick chat with them. Okay. And then we would decide whether or not we'd let our kids go to that house, or whether we would control the situation by having those kids come to our house. Okay. So we actually set up little heuristics to figure that stuff out. But what we wanted was for our kids to play with other kids. We wanted our kids, like, our oldest daughter had she made friends that she wouldn't ever have otherwise made, okay, of different races and different colors, by going to, like, all of our kids did. They met kids that looked not like them. Okay. Some that were fat, some that were skinny, some that were black, some that were white. Our second daughter went to probably, I would guess that there's no more diverse high school anywhere in the country than where she went to in the DC suburbs. And her best friend was Syrian, and her next best friend was Vietnamese. And they were just like, it was important for her to see that there's people that aren't just like her. And so then the kids would come home and then say, hey, this is what my friends do at their house. And we would say, that's great. Here's how that's different from us. Here's why so we're always ready to explain the why. Okay. Like St. Peter, be able to explain why you have hope. Okay. And so we were never afraid of what the kids would see. And I know that there are a lot of parents that really want to protect their kids. I don't want my kids to see some of the things that they're going to see. That's great. And unless they live with you into their old age, okay, they're going to see those things, and then they're going to have a question at some other point in time. Okay.
Right.
I think it's really important to, and again, this was for us. So we had family traditions. Okay. We prayed a rosary on Sunday together as a family every night or every week. Okay. We said prayers as a family before we went to bed and before meals. Okay. But we didn't make the kids wear uniforms. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
we had certain things that we did. We had things that we didn't do. Okay. We had talks about what was appropriate to wear for swimsuits and what wasn't, and why. And there was always the why. Okay. It was always with respect to preparing the kids to be out on their own. Okay. Because we had enough hope and we had enough confidence in our own, in our own culture that we were building to stand against the broader culture of the world.
I want to hear from Trace and Jeremy too, like if that resonates, but I just want to just briefly say back to you, it sort of sounds like if you have a vacuum, it will get filled by something.
Mm-hmm.
So you might as well not have a vacuum. You need to like have a robust family culture already, so that it doesn't just, if you're not exactly clear about who you are or why you are the way you are, and what you believe in, some other set of beliefs is just going to fill in there. So it sounds like that's part of the strategy. And I'll let Trace or Jeremy go.
I think Tom, you and I are in similar situations, just different phases in life.
Mm-hmm.
Me and my wife, we're both products of public school. We felt very adamant about to whatever degree we could control that to ensure that they went to public schools as well. We're also a mixed race couple, right? And so there's certain concerns, right, in certain environments like schooling and social environments. We need to be aware of where our kids would be able to flourish. Yeah, I mean, I found, for me, the biggest issue having a 12-year-old in, hold on a second, getting the call. That's weird. For me, the biggest issue, the thing that's made parenting right now at this moment incredibly difficult is the darn internet. I mean, like, having a 12-year-old being in middle school is the worst time of virtually anyone's life, right? It is the nadir of everyone's life, right? It's a miserable experience because you're trying to learn all these things at the time you're a hormonal wreck. Like, everything is going wrong at the same time. And the internet is just like, it's like, we're gonna like give this like semi-psychotic person a drip feed on the worst of humanity, right? All of the worst things about the world. And kids are mean, kids are trying to figure things out, kids are liars, they're trying to figure out who they are in this world. And the internet, even if you're keeping them from YouTube, or the other kind of like wider issue is that there's still the private internet, right, of the way the kids are interacting, and the one thing I'm finding very difficult, and I in some respects envy the homeschooling crowd, is that like school is online now. Like, it's not just because of COVID. It's just that, like, literally, my son's in a robotics club at school and they communicate over Discord, right? So whether we wanted our kid to be on Discord or not is really a moot point. Like, he has to be on Discord for this school project. And, Discord is just it's Reddit, right? It's just Reddit kids are just being mean to each other. So before, you had to at least like look someone in the face, pass them a note. You had to actively engage in being mean. Now it's just like this flippancy, of just like, it's just a nonstop fire hose of just negativity and weirdness and joy and fun. I mean, it's the internet, right? It is what the internet is. And it is I'll be very, very honest that it has been, it is a tough nut to crack, and we're in the process of trying to crack it. And every week, if not every day, we're presented with some sort of like gray as hell conundrum where we're just like,
Oh,
how are we
So
supposed to
you
solve
have
for
an
this?
opportunity
You know,
to
like,
teach your kids.
what's
You have an
that?
opportunity. You have a great opportunity now to teach your kids that life isn't black and white, that it actually is gray. Everything in life is gray.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to highlight something that you mentioned, Tom, that I you know, what I keep falling back to, my heuristic that I keep falling back on is radical honesty with my kids, is ensure that they know there is nothing they can say or do that I will I will never pull my love from them, right? And so they can tell me, they can share their shame with me, they can ask questions, and I will answer them honestly. So when my 7-year-old asks me questions about sex, I'll answer them, you know, like whatever they ask me that comes up, I will answer it, and I'll answer it honestly. I will tell them my opinion on it. And more to your point, Tom, I will try my best to model my beliefs for them. You know, I know that, like, I mean, that's definitely something that's passed on directly from my parents. My parents were incredibly honest with me. When I asked them, did you ever do drugs, right? In high school, they were like, yeah, I did, you know, and this is what my experience was on drugs, you know, and they were honest with it. You know, my mom, for instance, was like, yeah, I really, really liked acid when I did it. It was a great experience. You know, my dad, you know, would say like, yeah, I took cocaine and it was the worst night of my life, you know, and here's why it was the worst night of my life, right? And oddly, you know, in my opinion, it led to me having a much more honest engagement with my adult life. You know, it didn't keep me from making mistakes, right? Ultimately, I had to make those on my own. But it did mean that there was no mystification around it. Like I had this idea of like, okay, if I do this, this is the range of experiences I'm likely to have. You know, like I was much more had much more opened eyes and much more clear about what my experiences were going to be moving forward. And I didn't feel as alone. And I also knew that I had people I could talk to, you know, that there was nothing I was going to say to my parents that they were, you know, they might be disappointed, right? If my kid comes and says, you know, they did something that I told them not to do, a classic example in my life is my parents were rabidly anti-gun my whole life, rabidly anti-gun. They would buy me G.I. Joe guys, but they take the guns before they gave it to me, throw it away. They wouldn't let me watch G.I. Joe because it was nothing but shooting. Like they were rabidly anti-gun. And of course, when I was 12, I had a friend with a BB gun and we're just like, you know, my parents don't know. But we shot cans and all the BBs ricocheted. Fortunately, none hit us. And they all went into the kid's siding, his parents' house siding, and left the siding was riddled with BB hole. You know,
oh my gosh.
And, you know, my parents, I told them, I just felt such shame about it. And I told them what happened. And then they found out anyway, because the parents were really pissed about their siding. But like, you know, my parents, they still loved me and they made it clear that they loved me, even though they were incredibly pissed and disappointed and I got punished for it, you know. And I think that that's, you know, the radical honesty with your kids, I think is really important. You have to have that line of communication. And that's something you foster from day one, right? Like you don't, in my opinion, like you don't have the sex or drug talk. You know, there's not a talk. It is actually a long ongoing conversation you have with your kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think,
Jeremy, I want to hear from you too about this.
Yeah. So I think that there's part of it depends on like what your motivation is, right? I think a lot of parents, they start from a place of fear, you know, and so it's like, oh, we're only homeschooling because we're afraid of what's going to happen to the kids, right? Or we're not going to give them this because we're afraid that this is going to happen. And fear is a terrible thing, man. Like it's amazing to, if you allow fear to control you, you end up making way for what you what you fear almost every time. It's amazing. And so it's like, you know, you can shelter your kids out of fear, and then they'll be like, I don't want to be sheltered, and then they'll go off and go crazy, you know. And so kind of coming back to this intentional parenting thing, it's like, no, man, like I'm working from a place of love, and I only want the best things for you, you know. And so what does that mean? Well, you know, everything has a cost. So, okay, can we do homeschool? Do we want to do homeschool? Do we feel that that would even be a positive experience? Maybe not, you know? And so, okay, we're going to do public school. Okay. Well, there is a cost to it. You know, there's a time cost of just not being around your kids for much of the day, you know, especially if they're involved in any extracurriculars. It's like, you know, we did do a year of it just because the season didn't allow for us to do what we were doing. And it was like, it was a positive experience, actually. You know, the kids were in kindergarten and third grade. I feel like those grades are pretty benign anyway, no matter where you're at, you know?
Yeah.
But there was a time cost to it. It's like, you know, if they wanted to play a sport, it's like, man, our week is done at that point, you know, and we only have breakfast and dinner together, you know, during the week at least, you know. And so but okay, so if that's what we're going to do, going back to the intentional thing, and okay, how do we, with these constraints, still get what we want to do? So it's like, we're going to eat dinner every night together. Like we have to do that. That is a value of ours, and we're going to do that. And, you know, or whatever it is, to be able to, within those constraints of public school, private school, homeschool, whatever it is, you know, how can we still accomplish what we want to accomplish? And going back to the internet thing, you know, again, it's like, don't parent out of fear. You know, don't just be like, you're never ever doing this, but also like, you have to equip your kids, you know. You can't just send them out. Like there's the idea of like sheltering, and that's more fear-based, right? It's like, I can't let you go, you know. But there's also this thing of like, I'm not just going to let them have free reign everywhere. Like boundaries are so important. In fact, when kids don't have boundaries, that's when they go crazy. They actually ask for boundaries. In little children, you see it immediately. It's like when it's nap time, they just like, you know, and they go crazy. It's because they need that boundary of like, no, listen, you can't do that. Like, let's go to bed, you know, all this stuff. And so, it is thinking through like, intentionally thinking through what are our boundaries with the internet, with phone use, with texting, with all of this stuff, you know. And if you're going to give them that freedom, they have to be equipped to handle what comes with that freedom, the good and the bad, you know?
Yeah.
And so it is being very, very, having those conversations with your kids of like, listen, here's what comes with this. And if you make the wrong choice along the way, this is the cost to it. Because like I said, there's a cost to everything, you know? So it's like, I'm going to give you the freedom to text your friends. I mean, this is simple, right? Like, I mean, the idea of porn is like a whole different ballgame, because that's like, yeah, maybe that's another conversation. But even just the idea of like texting friends, right? That can be a really, really negative thing, in that all of a sudden you're just texting people and not actually having real life conversations with your friends, you know? And so if you're constantly texting, you're not practicing, especially at this age, right? At the young ages, you're not practicing this real life back and forth, how to have a real conversation, interject properly, you know, all of this stuff, right? And so you can even tell them like, listen, it's good you're communicating with your friends. Ask them to get together. Like, don't just sit on a device all day. You know, we control it highly, but we still allow some of the freedom. And it's like, okay, with this comes this responsibility. And if you choose to use it improperly, here are the repercussions of that. Just so you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I really like
It
what you're
sounds-
saying. I love what you're saying, Jeremy, because the kids, there's natural consequences. There's certain things that we actually let our kids do. Like if they didn't want
Totally.
to take a bath, we didn't make them bathe until because some other kid at school is going to tell them, you stink.
Yeah.
Okay. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to come home and bathe. Okay. Or you look dirty.
Sure.
Okay, great. Your hair looks awful. Okay, great. Because kids, that's the stuff that's self-correcting, we let be self-correcting. Okay. The stuff that's harmful, that they're not mature enough because they don't have life experience
Totally.
to know that's going to harm them, then we don't let that happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And we're always thinking about, like, because the kids will say, well, why do I have to learn this? And we'd say, well, because in the real world, when you get a job, your boss is going to expect this of you. Okay.
Right.
Now we're going to continue to make that point to you until you're gone. And then when we're no longer able to make that point to you and you're responsible for it, you'll figure it out. Like you'll figure out that you have to get to work on time. Okay. That you can't just show up whenever you want to. Okay.
Exactly.
And you can't just do whatever you want to do this day. There's a reason that we're asking you to learn certain disciplines. Okay. Because we believe that the discipline of making your bed in the morning, okay, or the discipline of doing X, whatever that is, will translate to you, doing whatever. But there are other things that we let go. Like we didn't fight with the kids over how dirty to keep their room. Okay. And there was a reason for that, because we wanted them to have something of their own domain that they weren't always fighting with us about. Okay. And then if they couldn't find their socks, we'd say, well, I'm sorry that you can't find your socks. I mean, it's on your pile. Okay. There's your natural consequence. Does that make sense?
Right.
There are certain things that are really good to help them build their own awareness of the world and on autonomy and independence, and others that they're just not prepared for because they don't even know that they're not prepared for.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you guys are talking about equipping children with age appropriate tools in accordance with their ability to take on the responsibility of those tools. And then, that is just this iterative process over the course of their childhood and into adulthood. Like, I'm going to give you tools. If you are able to use them, I want to like see that you're able to use them, and then your responsibility and like degrees of freedom grow. I also just want to make a quick comment on the homeschool versus public school conversation. I'm like a hybrid of you guys. So, I just think there's like you were saying, Jeremy, just there's pluses and minuses to everything. My kids go to public school, but it is a short day relative to the US. It's a 5-hour day. And then we do some homeschooling stuff, when they get home. So I think it's like a nice hybrid, because they get to, they at their school in Uruguay, they have to sit for lunch together. Which I really love. And so they have this table manners and this whole ritual with that. They have to learn to get along with other kids, which you can do even when you homeschool with, extracurricular activities too. Other time where they have to be around other kids. And then when they're home here, we do other stuff, things that they wouldn't be able to do at school. And I think that's okay too. I also have a fantasy of doing what you talked about, Tom, long trips with the kids when they get a little bit older, like, slow travel. We go to some place for 3 weeks or a month and just, live in that place once a year, live somewhere differently.
We went to Colorado. We went to, our family's got a cabin between Creed and South Fork in the San Juan Mountains. And we'd go there for, 3 weeks at a time and let them play in the river. And let them climb the sand dunes and let them go for hikes. you know?
It's so beautiful. And I'm just a big proponent in general in my life, but I also want to teach my kids this, like, life is just super varied. And like, I would love for their childhood to be an exploration of the different parts of life. I lived in Chicago my whole life, grew up in a working class family, and I didn't really experience any part of the world until I studied abroad in Rome. And I was like, oh my God, there's a world outside of Chicago. It's amazing. And so I really, really want to expose them to that. We're going to wrap up pretty soon, but I just wanted to, I guess, give everyone the chance to make a statement, specifically along the lines of our ideal listener is somebody who's like, just getting started. Maybe they're a doomer already and they just don't even know how to wrap their head around like how to take steps toward optimism, toward something hopeful. So with regard to parenting, what advice would you give to somebody who just feels like crushed and overwhelmed by the doom? How do they take first steps toward something more positive?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I love that. I really do. Because there's fear being pumped, right? Fear and doom being pumped everywhere you look. And I think from a parenting perspective, realizing that kids are amazing and they are the future, right? And so doing our part to build something for the future that will be a good thing in this world. And I think thinking of being a parent as pouring something into your child, you know what I mean? Thinking of it that way, rather than I'm just raising a kid. It's like, no, you're taking a good portion of your life, where I could just be sipping lattes, which sounds really boring, but like whatever. You're taking a good portion of your life and you're pouring into them, and then it's like, okay, what do you want to pour into them? I want to pour into them like truth, goodness, and beauty, because I want that to be the output that they have, of understanding what's true, like understanding what's good and creating beautiful things. I think if everyone, or if a bulk of our population, or even 20%, like I think it's 20% that you need for a revolution, right? It's like 15 and 20%. You don't even need the bulk of the population, but to really just understand, like let's create beautiful things and let's create lasting things, and that includes our families. Like we could really, really make a really cool society. It's in fact it's the doom and the fear that causes us to do things like, oh, let's depopulate, or like let's whatever, you know what I mean? That's poverty thinking, and it will bring poverty, but changing your mindset to this like abundance mindset of like, no, like let's work together and create something beautiful together. And it's absolutely possible, and we should be optimistic about it, because if you're not, you will make way for the bad stuff to come, if that makes any sense.
Totally. I just want to make one little note. Trace, I want you to go next because I want to end with Tom. And Tom, I don't know if you're aware, at the end of all of our podcasts, we cut somebody off mid-sentence, just a weird thing that evolved. So I want Trace to go, but then I want Tom to end, and I want you to end, Tom, with the absolute secret key to parenting that everybody must know. So anyways, Tracy, you go next.
Yeah, I was going to jump in anyway, because I was like, whatever Tom says is going to be the nugget of wisdom that we want to leave people with. It certainly won't be me. Whatever I say will not be what we want to leave people with. So, but I'm actually just going to piggyback off of what Jeremy and Tom have been kind of talking about and batting around this entire conversation, which is that because this has actually been pretty eye-opening for me. Like this, I'm really feel very blessed to be a part of this conversation, because I think I've you guys have imparted a lot of wisdom to me. And the key is that, like, we are, as a family, building something for the future. And now I am one of the chief stewards of it right now, as the kind of the oldest, you know, I'm the parent, I'm the patriarch, right? I'm here at the top right now. But it will be handed down to my children, and then it will be handed down to their children. And I think that one of the things I've been because I have not been thinking of it that way, you know, and certainly American culture in a way it pays lip service to it, but is not actually set up very well to enact your life in such a way, you know.
Yeah, too individualistic to a certain degree, right?
Exactly. And you know, it's always like you're saving your money for your retirement. And then when you're retired, you want to protect your money so you can, oh yeah, maybe pass it down to your kids. But like, it's all about like saving up for retirement, saving up for the future, instead of, no, we are actively producing this thing right now, and it will never be done. And I will just sort of like, I'm working on a novel that will never be finished. And when I die, I'm going to pass that manuscript on to my kid, and they're going to write their chapters, and then they'll pass it on. And this novel will literally never be done. It is, and in fact, the purpose of the novel is the act of writing it itself, right? This has been very eye-opening for me, is I think that there, you know, I think that one of the things that one of my failures as a parent is not realizing that. And I don't include my kids. First off, I don't think that we're as intentional as we should be, right? That's just sort of a mea culpa here, right? But beyond that, I don't think that, you know, I've been like, oh, I'm in this by myself. Me and my wife are in this by ourselves. We have to do this for our kids. Instead of being like, well, no, I mean, Collins is 12. He can start taking ownership of the future that we're building together. You know, should he be involved in some of the bill talk, you know, and some of the budget talks, you know, like, should he understand what we're building here and have some ownership over what we leave him, you know? And I think that that's a very beautiful concept. And I really am very thankful that I've been to be a part of this conversation. I want to say, Tom, I like, again, I feel like there's something in our stories that almost like I'm just you know, an earlier version of you, because my oldest is 12, right? I'm coming to these, I felt like I've been on a bullet train for the last 12 years. And now a big part of like what I'm thinking of and a big part of my like mindset right now is, okay, I need to pause, because this bullet train's never going to stop, right? I've been waiting for it to stop, and it's just never going to stop. So I have to pause and think about how I'm going to use whatever is left of my life to build something that I'm proud of and can enjoy and find joy in as I'm building it, right? Because like I said, it'll never be done. So if I'm waiting for the joy for it to be done, then I'll never have a joyful life. Yeah, and now I'm thinking like, how can I include my kids? How can I give them ownership and impart a sense of ownership in what they're building, instead of just being like, no, this is my nest egg and I'll protect it until I die, and then I'll give it to you to do what you want with, you know? How can I include them? How can we collectively, the four of us, build this castle together, you know? So yeah, thank you all so much for allowing me to be
That's really beautiful, Trace. I have chills from you talking. All right, last word to Tom.
Okay, I love that you're going to cut me off at some random point, and I have no idea when that's going to be. I hope I can make a couple good points before then. Nobody knows anything. Okay, listen, and that's something that we have to remind ourselves of all the time. Nobody knows anything, and if both of the branches of my family were illiterate, uneducated peasants, and they can produce a PhD senior military officer. Okay, who's learned how to be comfortable with little. Okay, they didn't leave us money, they didn't leave us land, they left us love. Okay, and they left us some lessons. And today, it's really weird. My wife and I are friends with all 4 of our adult kids now. Okay. But because we were never friends with them when they were growing up, we were their parents and they were our kids. And I think that a lot of people today are trying to be friends with their kids, end up in terrible relationships with them. Okay. And the only reason that we're friends with our kids is because we were parents to them first. All right. And I love what you guys said about truth, beauty, and goodness. Loving them means willing the good of the other. Okay. Not to make them into something that you like you're not creating a work of art. God made them. Okay. All the problems that my kids have are a result of me. All the good that they do are a result of grace that came, through whatever we figured out we were supposed to be doing. All right. And so fill them with truth, beauty, and goodness. Give them opportunities to see things within a set of boundaries. Chesterton said that the kids play best when there's a fence around the school ground. Then they're the most free. They're not free when there's no fence.
Yep.
They're scared when there's no fence and they huddle around the school. Okay. Yep. They're free to explore the yard when there's a fence.